everybody. And welcome to this. Thank you for attending, for watching along, and welcome to our second Engage Unconference online exhibition watch party session. Thanks to Don Galliano for hosting that first session, which is still available on the NCCPE YouTube channel. Now, these are a series of flash talks, panels, and case studies related to the exhibition, which you can find on the Padlet. And they add some context and texture to what you'll find there on the Padlet. So, it's quickfire. So we're going to go straight into our first speaker. And I'd like to invite Nassar Mir to come and talk to us about redistribution of power. Nassar.
Hi, thanks so much. It's great to be here. So we're sharing what we're calling living images, which have been drawn by the artist Paula Rosa, and through which we can think about the redistribution of power, because they're a set of accounts which try to help us to visualize how we can teach and how we can learn, and what other approaches different to what we're presently doing in our lecture theatres, in our classrooms, in our tutorials might look like. So if you're able to have a look, each living image is trying to help us to think collectively and creatively about power, and specifically about experiences of inequality and oppression that come from the misdistribution of power. And the living images are co-organised with Dr. Rashni Limke at the Business School at the University of Edinburgh, and they feature contributions from scholars working on the Global South, working on gender, working on race, working on a variety of inequalities, including Dr. Katusha Bento, Dr. Rama Yang, Dr. Carl Dixon, Dr. Anga Mini Ganguly Mitra, Dr. Radhika Govanda, Dr. Kavira Qureshi, and Dr. Shara Bhattacharya. Now, as one of my colleagues, Dr. Radhika Govinda, describes, the living image is a way of trying to offer a visual invitation and also a plea. It's an invitation to take a moment to try and consider not only the challenges, the pushbacks, the angers, the vulnerability that come with thinking about power in the classroom, but also the incredible joys, the ways in which positive experiences come with thinking about inequalities of power within classrooms. And the illustrations offer a chance to kind of embrace those dynamics, some of those critical dynamics which, through narrative, through written word, can be quite abstract. And visually portrayed, they allow us to ask questions about whether or not it's possible to have a kind of a pedagogical approach that's anchored in a critical set of questions about power and about our relationship to power. And it's something which, as a collective, we've been able to use in a number of different platforms and encourage our students to work through. So in addition to set readings, they may consult a visual illustration, which get them to think about ways in which inequalities, distributions of power aren't readily necessarily described in a written text, but can be accessed and approached through a visual form. So that's something that our living images try to speak to, and it's one of the things that I'm hoping to come back to in the discussion with people here today.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Nassar. Just a quick question from me, actually. I'm just really curious, how are you going to develop this going forward? How are you going to use it as you go forward with your work?
Well, one of the ways in which we use it is to make sure that it's a core part of our additional reading. So rather than just have a set reading, a chapter, a book, or an article, that students go off and they spend time working through the visual images, and they offer interpretations of what it is that's being portrayed. Because through that, especially for social scientists, a certain kind of a sociological imagination is encouraged. They can situate themselves in relation to an image just as you might situate yourself in relation to a piece of art, try and make sense of it. And that's something they can bring back to a classroom, to a tutorial, where those discussions then generate more potential conversations between colleagues and students who haven't thought about these topics before.
Fabulous. That's really fascinating. Thank you for bringing that to us. And we will hopefully come back to you later on with some Q&As. And we're going to move on now, though, to a flash panel. And this is with Margaret Stanley and Sam Franklin, who are going to be telling us about inclusive online engagement. So I'd love to invite you, Margaret and Sam, to introduce yourselves and tell us a sentence or two about your project.
Okay, can you hear me?
Hi, Margaret. Yes, we can.
Great. My name is Margaret Stanley. I'm the PCI coordinator for the Return Project at the University of Liverpool. We are a clinical trial where we aim to reduce inequalities of access to adult primary dental care in Merseyside and Cheshire. And my PCI work is heavily influenced by the need to engage with those who face the most severe inequalities and disadvantage. So I established community partnerships with a range of organisations who are already working within communities facing the biggest disadvantages. As COVID restrictions prevented in-person engagement, I strove to move our PCI work onto online, and we had a lot of success.
Thanks very much. Sam?
Thank you. So I'm Sam, so I'm a project officer at the University of Manchester, and I specifically work within the Faculty of Biology, Medicine and Health, and within that I'm in the Social Responsibility and Public Engagement team. But my area of focus is in Patient and Public Involvement and Engagement, or PPIE, and for that I do things like organise events, create training, create resources, and also manage our faculties forum, which features staff, students and public contributors.
That's fascinating. Thank you very much. So, a couple of questions for you, really. How has your practice actually changed in the past 18 months? Obviously, moving to online, but what has that meant for you? Either party.
I think for, like you're saying, we had to move everything online, and no one had really done that before. So for me specifically, it was more thinking about creating resources, trying to do like how-to guides, both for staff and for our public, because a lot of people hadn't used the software before. So it was literally March, you have to go on Zoom, everything's online. So it was trying to figure out how we could actually do that to try and replicate face-to-face meetings.
Yes, a very similar story. I spent a lot of time going out and about meeting people. This wasn't possible anymore. So we moved online, but a lot of our members are suffering totally from digital exclusion through strong contacts with community partnerships. We knew that they were struggling themselves to meet their members in any format because they had no online capability. So we worked hard to include them by investigating how you can access Zoom by landline and sent out instructions for how people could do that. But also because we were meeting people online, and everyone was working online, I started to try and tap into meeting people in their working day. So through my community contacts, I spread my net wider and started to meet people while they were at work, asking people, this is a health inequalities project. Would your staff have any input on that? So I met with firefighters in their working day, their lunchtime. They had to promise they could go if there was a 999 call, which added extra excitement. Police staff, council staff, many of whom were working with the disadvantaged communities I couldn't reach. And joining in online in a meeting that was already pre-arranged or meeting in the workplace, it meant that I was a break to everyone sitting around doing their normal tasks. And that really did encourage people to get involved with me. People who had never considered working with the university before came along in large numbers and then spread the word to their colleagues that actually this was interesting and they did have something to contribute. So it did work. Although we found some doors closed, we did find for the university some were open because people were willing to help. If I was able to explain to them how they could do this without it impinging on their ordinary time, that I could make it as simple as possible for them to join, that the task would be easy to understand, and that they wouldn't feel pressured that they were in some sort of meeting. They understood what they were signing up for, and they were enjoyable sessions. And I know that if people did come back and did recommend me to other people.
That's brilliant. So is there any other advice either of you would give to other public engagement professionals trying to facilitate these online interactions and to grow these online interactions? It's what I'm hearing from both of you is there's been growth in this as well.
I think you've really got to think about how you set up your session. It's not one size fits all, and if you do come across a successful format, you can't necessarily just replicate that with another group. So the online sessions that we ran with the firefighters and the police, that wouldn't have worked with another group I was working with, young people, because from speaking to their group leaders, they'd already had something similar. Youngsters, young men aged 18 to 25 are one of our biggest demographics we need as non-attenders for dental care. But I wanted to work with them in a way where they would work with us. So I designed a web design session. I have two groups across Merseyside, both meeting me simultaneously on Zoom, never met them, and they were able to meet me with having the material sent in advance. They knew what the activity was going to look like, and it was totally voluntary. But because they knew they would know more about web design and social media than I did, and because they understood what the session would look like, they did all turn up. I was able to introduce an element of competition again because I knew the groups, I knew what they would be like, and I knew what hadn't worked. I think that's the key. It's not just what works, it's what doesn't work. You can't replicate activities face-to-face online, and you can't always replicate online activities with different groups. You have to really take time to get to know your group. You have to work out who's the best person in your organisation to facilitate this, who can make the group talk if they're all sitting there quietly. And as Stephanie said, you have to really start with the basics. Never assume people know how to log on to Zoom, how to use the chat function. Because many people would rather sit and type than speak over a microphone. Even people who've been on Zoom for ages, they're not always comfortable with it. But if you can make it comfortable, you can make them feel at ease. You've got a good host and a relaxed setup. People will join because they don't feel it's going to be as scary as they might have previously.
Fabulous, thank you. Sam, would you like to add to that? Any advice for others facilitating?
Yeah, so quite similar to what Margaret was saying, really, is to basically think about your audience specifically, because like you're saying, it doesn't really work the same with every group that you're going to engage with. So we try to do a mix of a program as well, because we found, especially with like the online meetings, you don't have the same attention span. So we have to try and create things. So we added in like speakers, interactive sessions, tried to encourage people to engage within the chat and stuff as well. So people would be focused throughout the whole meeting, so they would be a bit more engaged rather than just listening to speakers, but to try and break it up with like panel discussions as well. We also involve a member of the public in all our planning as well. So actually speaking to the audience that you're wanting to involve really helps you to plan your activities specifically for them, and it's similar to like what Margaret was saying.
Fabulous. Okay, that's really, really interesting. A question actually that occurs to me is, we're talking a lot about our audiences and our stakeholders. What sort of different approaches or facilitation was needed from the research point of view? Because as facilitators, one of our audiences is, after all, researchers. So how did you have to adapt, or help them adapt might be a better phrase? Maybe Sam, we can come to you as first. Is there anything you had to do to help researchers adapt online engagement?
So it's kind of similar to our public, where it was training them how to use the systems, talking to our public as well about how they actually want to be engaged and the different ways we can go about it. I think obviously it was very hard for everyone going to this online format. So luckily we were able to put on training sessions and things like that of how you can actually use Zoom. One of our celebration events, which was in 2020, just after the pandemic, we actually created a resource about how to engage people remotely, and that was with our attendees. So that was with researchers, our teachers, and with the public as well. So we found that creating these resources and speaking to people and giving advice where we could, that was one of the main things that we did to try and help our researchers.
Thanks. Margaret, do you have anything to add on that?
I found that showing the quality of the feedback that you're able to get if you tailor your activities specifically does the work for me. When I show researchers what I've been able to glean, how many people I've been able to speak to, how I've been able to convince employers to let me into their building site, factory, workplace, and then what the quality of feedback I was able to get. Researchers are only too keen then to adopt similar practices. I often found that if I was uncomfortable with the public weren't, then that's the best strategy. If I'm sitting in their workplace rather than them sitting in mine, the quality of feedback was so strong because people suddenly felt that their contribution was valued. They understood I'd taken the time to meet them in their workplace or on Zoom, and they felt that their contribution was valid, and they were so much more eager to engage with the materials, even coming back to me after my visit or online visit with further suggestions, and showing that to researchers really did all of the work for me because they understood, it's easy to do if you put all of the hard work in advance.
Yeah, there's a lot to be said about putting the evidence out there for people to judge for themselves, especially when it's so positive. So one last question then for both of you, and that's on what's the future for online engagement post-pandemic? Let's imagine a day is coming where we are in that situation post-pandemic. What is the future? What has the last 18 months changed for engagement in the online zone?
For me, it's opened a lot more doors because there are so many people, for example, emergency workers, that I could never have accessed in person. I wouldn't have been able to go onto police stations or secure buildings. There's so many secure settings I wouldn't have been able to access. And that the workers themselves just wouldn't have been able to block out the time. Whereas by appealing to their human resource department and explaining to them as a public health issue, they have an input. Their workers can help, and they can help their own workers with their welfare themselves. The doors are far easier to open. So I was able to access people who, during their normal working day, simply would not be able to take the time to come across the city to the university to meet me. So for me, it has opened a lot of doors, and I'm very keen, to ensure that this continues. For the university to be visible, for higher education establishments to be visible in more settings is crucial to encourage more people to engage with the university within research and, of course, within education.
Great, thank you. Sam?
Yeah, so similar to Margaret, I think we found that it's been a great way to engage with a lot more people. I think looking in the future, for me, I see it more of like the hybrid, bit like the hybrid working, where some things will be face-to-face, others will be online. I've been speaking to some of our public contributors, and a lot have health conditions, and they found the fact they don't have to travel into the university a lot more better for them. But they do want the potential for the flexibility in the future. So say it's a couple of hours, like a longer meeting or an event that they specifically want to go to, they'd want to see that in person. Whereas if it's just an hour meeting that, the part of a focus group or something like that, they'd rather that would be online. So I think, there's definitely a lot of benefits from this online engagement. But we also need to be aware that, as we were saying, not everyone can access online systems, don't have access to Wi-Fi. So it's trying to think to the future about how we can engage with everyone.
I think there's a very fascinating line there. Where does online become a benefit to in-person, and where does it actually become a challenge to your outputs? And that'd be an interesting one for us all to reflect on, I think, as we go forward. Any last words from either of you just now? We can come back later, but no? In which case, thank you very much. That's our mini panel, and we're going to go on now to another flash talk from Pearl John, and this is about the photon shop. I'm excited to hear about it. So, hi, Pearl.
Hi. Well, I'm the public engagement leader in physics and astronomy at the University of Southampton, and I'm also the public outreach leader for the EPSERC Future Manufacturing Photonics Hub. And photonics is the science of light. Better get that out of the way. So the Photon Shop was a pop-up shop at the Light Up Pool Digital Arts Festival in 2019 and 2020. And we had a very successful shop in 2019 with 1,000 members of the public going through it over 3 nights, so in about 9 hours time. But we became aware that there were members of the public who just weren't enjoying themselves and couldn't access the activities that we had. So we had about 8 different research groups showing their research in photonics, fiber optic technology, and astronomy. But the shop was noisy, crowded, it was an exciting venue, but it was just overwhelming for some people who self-disclosed as autistic. And the mother of one autistic son who couldn't even get through the front door said, you need some training. So took that on board, and we had a training session by Autism Hampshire, who it was called Understanding Autistic People. And so we made a number of adaptations to the activity as a result of the training. And in doing that, although it sounds like an us and them situation, many members of staff and students in STEM, studying STEM in STEM, are themselves on the autism spectrum. So what we did was we asked for a larger venue. We had 2,000 people the next year, so we needed a much larger venue, but we limited the number of people coming through the doors. We had an autism-friendly half hour. We changed the venue to include a chill-out zone and floor signage, so that as somebody came into the event, they were able to navigate around without looking up and seeing all the visual chaos that was going on. We had provided sensory information in advance, and that meant that all of the researchers taking part had to very carefully think through all of their activities from an audience perspective. What was somebody going to see? What were they going to smell? What were they going to hear? And to provide this information up front to people who would come along, and then have an idea of what they want to go and see, experience, and also what they didn't want to see and experience, which would have been overwhelming to them. At a stand, we made a number of different adaptations. We included timers to warn people if they were going to spend what we would consider too long playing with a particular activity, and so provided boundaries up front. And we also provided key messages, written objectives on the table, so that demonstrators could point to them rather than talk at somebody if somebody didn't want to be talked to. So we became much more sensitive to what audience members wanted. So the changes, the adaptations, which are included in a booklet, which I believe is going to be posted, those changes really benefited everybody. We became much less last minute in our activities. We were much more caring of how we came across. There is a tendency to be overexcited, over bubbly in your attempts to infuse and engage someone, and if they don't want that, it's not a helpful form of communication. So become more empathetic, I think, to audience members. Yes, I've probably run out of time now, but happy to answer any questions.
Absolutely, thanks so much for that. That's fascinating, Carol, and I'll definitely be downloading that booklet, because I think I can see lots of ways that we could include that in some of the training that we do as well up in St Andrews. We're going to move on just now for time, but we will hopefully come back. We're going to go to our final case study of the day, and that is with Carmel McGrath, Rishi Nayan Varodaria, and John Norton. And I will invite you to reflect on your redistribution of power case study. Thank you.
Lovely. Thanks very much, Mari. Hi, everyone. I'm Carmel, and I'm a PhD student at the University of Southampton. And my research is about exploring the impact of patient and public involvement in health research. So just to clarify, by patient and public involvement, we mean working with patients as partners in research and working with them rather than to or about or for them. So rather than involving them as participants in clinical trials or in interviews, we're working with them as partners in research. So today, John, Rishi and I are going to be speaking about our experiences of working together and sharing power to collaboratively create a coding framework. And this coding framework was used to analyse 2,415 responses to open text questions on ResearchFish. So ResearchFish, just for context, is an online reporting system that funders use, and they ask researchers to report annually on their research impacts and outcomes. So NLHR are one of the funders that ask their researchers to do this. And as part of their reporting, they're required to report on their PPI activities. And one of the questions they're asked is, what difference does patient and public involvement make to your health research? So that is the open text question that John, Rishi and I analysed using this framework. So now we're going to share our experiences of doing that. So I'm going to hand over to you, Rishi.
So yeah, my name's Rishi. I'm a civil engineering student at the University of Southampton. So I've had the pleasure of working alongside John and Carmel, and this was since Carmel reached out to me to be a PPI, a member of her research, and this was from a perspective of me as a lay member. So as somebody who's not used to coding frameworks, and I've not had to encounter this in my field of work, it was great to gain an insight into a new way to classify data. I was given support to be able to engage meaningfully with our work. So we were able to co-produce this framework, and that was alongside these two fantastic colleagues in Carmel and John. We did encounter some challenges along the way, and one of these was discerning meaning from some of the more vague and brief responses. They were limited either in length with words, or they were quite broad in terms of what the possible original intention could have been. So this did enable us to have a lot of discussion over it, and then fitting that into a framework did turn out to be quite tricky. And it was at this point where ultimately we were able to hand back that power to Carmel as a researcher, and she was able to take on what we discussed and what we contributed, and make a final decision on achieving the best possible framework in an outcome. So I'd say that myself, I was slightly apprehensive at the outset due to the fact that I didn't have very much medical background or any knowledge like that. But it was a case that Carmel was able to engage with me and explain to me about the context and the reason behind what we were doing. And I think having people who've not been engaged in a similar way before can be really helpful to avoid then working in almost an echo chamber. This cooperative approach is a great example of balancing and sharing knowledge and power. And I think the results we produce through our partnership are a great example to then show to others to encourage future PPIE members to get involved in health research. I was personally given lots of guidance by Carmel before engaging, and it helped me to be able to contribute to my full potential. And I'd say the public engagement structure that we were able to prove worked was great, and John and I were both able to see a tangible impact from our individual work on the final framework, and that was due to the initial enabling by Carmel. And it is by encountering challenges and by challenging our own work that we can achieve our best results. And John's going to explore this shift in power in a bit more detail.
Thank you, Rishi. Yes, I'm John, and my main activity at the moment is being a public partner in a variety of research bodies, mainly with Imperial College, but I was absolutely delighted when I had the opportunity to work with Carmel and Rishi, because it has been a deeply rewarding experience. And Rishi has just given us a very good description of how the three of us have worked together co-productively in designing the framework to enable Carmel the better to research into the attitudes of researchers to public involvement. He's also addressed some of the challenges that it threw up and how they were addressed. For me, this is an excellent example of how power can successfully be shared between professionals and public partners. This has not always been the case, and I'm going to say a few words about the changes that have taken place. In recent years, there have been considerable changes in the distribution of power in the world of healthcare and in its accompanying research, by the greater involvement of people like us, patients and the public, much more directly in that work than has been before. Some of this has been because the NHS constitution and guidance has changed, and also because the requirements for financing research projects actually require PPIE, public involvement. But I see it actually mostly by an increasing realization that such involvement does bring better healthcare and better results from research. And I think that is actually far more important than any rules will ever achieve. Members of the public, of course, have always been needed as participants in research, but seldom got truly involved as equal partners in the planning and the carrying out of that research. Happily, it is being much more widely accepted that the experience and knowledge that patients and public can bring does make a real difference to the way that research projects are both planned and then carried out, and indeed also, just to mention engagement, are then disseminated and made use of. The work that Carmel, Rishi and I have been engaged in as partners together, sharing power, illustrates that, I think, in two important ways. First, in the totally cooperative way in which we work together in partnership, co-productively, and also because, as you heard from Carmel, the research itself is designed to reveal how researchers react, actually, to public involvement. There is, of course, still more to be done to achieve total acceptance of public involvement. For instance, and this was revealed in some of the research fish replies, that technical or specialized research topic was felt by sub-researchers not to be suitable for public involvement. But I totally disagree with that. I think there is always a place for other views from partners from the public to make a difference. And that sharing of power, I think, will always be relevant. I do hope to be part of making this happen, and I hope further to work with Rishi and Carmel, and I'll hand you back for a little sum up from Carmel.
Thank you, John. So we hope we've been able to provide you with some useful insights here about how it was possible for us to work together to share that power. And I hope you can see the important impact, not just for the research, but also for us as individuals. And we'd really encourage people, researchers, to go out and find new ways to be able to work with patients and the public and involve them and be able to create that space to share power and use forums like this to share your experiences and reflections with wider audiences. So I just want to say thank you so much, John and Rishi, for your dedication and your support to this work. It's been a fantastic experience, and thank you to Engage Conference for allowing us to come and speak today.
And thanks very much to you. Absolutely, that's absolutely fascinating. And yeah, it's really interesting to see some work coming up about the attitudes of researchers as well. It will create a really nice baseline, Carmel, I hope, for ongoing research in your field. We have managed to fill the time, I have to say, and I think we're going to have to go straight to the close rather than questions, which I'm very sorry about, everybody, but this has been utterly fascinating. I would like to remind viewers that you can explore all of the exhibits further, these ones and other ones, on the Padlet board, and the links are shared in the video description at the end, and hopefully in the chat alongside the YouTube video just now. Don't forget, there is another one of these on-conference online exhibition watch parties on the 10th of November at the same time, that's 12:30. And don't forget about the Engage conference itself, of course. If you think this is good, just wait till you see the conference itself. So I am delighted to have been your host. I'm Barry Stewart from the University of St Andrews, and I would like to invite all of our speakers to come back online while I say thank you to the viewers now and later. And if we can do a quick wave from all of us to everybody, it's been great to see you. Thank you very much, everybody. Hopefully see you all again soon.